Okay, good afternoon everyone. Thank you for coming on to this talk. I'm Stephen Kennedy. I'm from the Library Social Policy section, and this is my colleague Chris Murphy. And today we're going to talk about important changes to Employment and Support Allowance, ESA, which are coming in from next April. Or rather, Chris is going to talk in more detail about them. Before Chris does go into the changes, I'm going to say a little bit about the context within which they're happening and how we've got to where we are today with ESA and capacity benefits. First of all, about what we mean by incapacity benefits. Basically, ESA, along with certain other benefits, are intended to cover the day-to-day living costs of people who, for reason of sickness or disability, are unable to do full-time paid work. So we generally talk about such benefits or benefits in that type as being income replacement, such as income maintenance benefits. It's important to distinguish them from other disability benefits, specifically benefits such as DLA, personal independence payment, which are intended to cover the, or help with the extra costs resulting from disability. Incapacity benefits have been subject to almost constant change and revolution, rethinking since for as long as I've covered Social Security, and I've been in this game for longer than I care to remember, so that's quite a long time. But very briefly, to give the background to ESA, Employment Support Allowance was introduced by the Labour government, not by the previous Labour government, to replace incapacity benefits for people making new claims after October 2008. And if you go back to the debates at the time, the Green Paper, the White Paper, which preceded those changes, then the emphasis was very much in moving from what they call sort of passive benefit to an active benefit. In other words, not writing people off who are found to be incapable of work for whatever reason, writing people off, letting languish parked on incapacity benefits at the time. Concentrating on what people can do rather than what they can't do, not writing people off. So we'll talk about what that means in a moment. But in terms of the structure of ESA, it would, like the preceding system of incapacity benefits, rather it would be contributory and means-tested versions of it. Contributory version depending upon the claimant having a sufficient national insurance record. And also a means-tested version would be means-tested depending upon your other income and resources for those without sufficient contributions for the contributory version. Or people could be entitled to both depending upon the circumstances. Crucial to the structure of ESA was this new medical test called the work capability assessment, which would then determine the phase of the type of ESA that the person would then move on to. Overlying, the sort of underlying target, so the key aim for ESA, as set out by the Labour government, was to reduce the incapacity benefits caseload by 1 million people by 2015. In terms of how ESA works, well, this shows the structure of ESA, but it helps me talk through what the process is of applying for ESA to be assessed. When a person first becomes sick and unable to work, then they can claim ESA in what we call the assessment phase, the initial phase, simply by getting their doctor to submit a sick note saying that they're unable to work. They're quite confusingly sick notes, and they're referred to as fit notes, but it means the same thing. So after being on ESA in what we call the assessment phase, and the amount you get depends upon your age. If you're under 25, you get a lower amount than if you're 25 or over. You then undergo what is the work capability assessment process. And that's a functional assessment which looks at your ability to undertake a whole range of activities which are said to be relevant to the world of work. There are three possible outcomes from the work capability assessment. First is that you're not entitled to ESA. In other words, you don't meet the threshold of the criteria of limited capability for work. And you're found fit for work, then your only other option is to claim GSA, unless you want to appeal, and then there's a lot of other process, but that's another story. If you satisfy the limited capability for work threshold for ESA, then there are a series of further tests or further assessments you're undertaking to determine whether you also have a limited capability for work-related activity. Now that sounds very complicated, but basically, to cut it short, it means that your condition is so serious that your functional limitations are such that it's not thought reasonable for you to undertake any further activities as a condition of getting benefit. If that's the case, you're placed in what we call the support group. If not, if you're not capable of work, but thought capable of undertaking activities which might at some stage in the future help you to return to work, you're placed into the work-related activity groups, what we call the WRAG, W-E-R-G. So if you're placed in the work-related activity group, you get that basic level of benefit plus an additional premium, currently about £29, called the work-related activity component. If you're in the support group, you get the basic amount plus a slightly higher amount of £36, which is called the support component. Okay. This is very much simplified, I should say, because if you're also getting an entitlement to means tested the income-related ESA, you might be entitled to other additions over and above that. But that's in a nutshell, is the structure of ESA. This is what the coalition government did. Essentially, the first three bullet points here were more or less things which were done, which more or less followed the existing plans of the Labour government, which hadn't yet been implemented. So they appointed, first of all, the independent reviewers of the work capability assessment. You may be familiar with the reports produced by Professor Malcolm Harrington and his successor, Paul Litchfield, on recommendations to improve the work capability assessment. That was a requirement set out in the Reform Act 2007, which the incoming government implemented. They also commenced pretty shortly after coming to power in 2010 with the reassessment of the remaining incapacity benefits claimants. Remember earlier, ESA, when it was first introduced, was only introduced for new claimants. The intention was always was from the start that existing people on incapacity benefits, severe disablement allowance and income support on the basis of incapacity for work, they would be reassessed to see if they satisfy the conditions for ESA. And that started in late 2010. There is an urban myth around that Labour would never have proceeded with reassessment of incapacity benefit claimants. Not true. Before the 2010 election, Yvette Cooper responded to the Social Security Advisory Committee saying, rejecting their suggestion that they postpone the reassessment, and said that we would continue with it. The coalition government basically followed that, the existing plans set out by the outgoing government. A third area, and again, this is where the coalition took forward the original plans set out by Labour. It was to introduce mandatory work-related activity for ESA claimants in the work-related activity group. What do we mean by work-related activity? Well, it doesn't mean that you would be required to look for paid work and accept jobs if they're offered to you. That's not the requirement. Instead, it means undertaking some kind of activities, which I said earlier, might help you move into work at a later stage. So it could include a whole range of things such as skills training, support with job search, drawing up a CV, short-term work placements or work experience. And some of that was being delivered through the coalition government's work programme, which now is going to be replaced by a new programme called the Health and
Work and Health Programme.
Work and Health Programme, which is supposed to get underway, I think, sometime later, sometime next year, or at least the contract. That's the other things which the coalition did, from late 2012, they introduced a stricter conditionality and sanctions regime for ESA, following similar stricter rules introduced for job seekers allowance. So the conditionality and sanctions for people deemed not to be satisfying the requirements to undertake work-related activity, attend workforce interviews, etc. Stricter than those which were set out originally by the Labour government. And possibly most significantly in terms of financial savings was the introduction of controversial rules from 2012 onwards, limiting the receipt of contributory ESA for claimants in the work relation activity group to 12 months. And that means that you can get the non-needs tested version for 12 months if you pay sufficient national insurance contributions. Thereafter, needs tested version only. Significant savings are expected from that, up to £1.8 billion a year by the year 2019-20. Another thing which is not on that list here, but it's worth mentioning anyway, is the early exit of Atos Healthcare from the contract for undertaking face-to-face assessments, which happened in early 2015. That wasn't only at the instigation of the government, it was the mutual agreement between Atos itself and the government to relinquish that contract, which has since been taken up by the company called Maximus, which you may have heard of, which operates under the branding of the Centre for Health and Disability Assessment. This is what's happened to the number of people on ESA and incapacity benefits over the years. This sort of shows that up to the mid-1980s or so, it was relatively stable, and then between then and the mid-1990s, it was quite a sharp increase, up to about £2.5 million claimants of ESA incapacity benefits. The most obvious thing from there is that the Labour government's aim of getting a £1 million reduction in the ESA caseload simply hasn't happened. It has declined slightly, but nothing like the change which was originally expected. So we still have around about 2.5 million claimants. In terms of expenditure, it is also a substantial chunk of welfare spending, just shy of £15 billion on incapacity benefits, which ESA accounts for 14.6 billion. That's the estimated forecast expenditure this year. Just finally, before handing over to Chris, just a sort of snapshot of who gets ESA. As I say, there's the two, once you satisfy the work capability assessment, you're either placed in the work-related activity group or the support group. The proportion of people placed in the support group has crept up quite substantially over time. The vast majority now, if you satisfy the threshold criteria from PSC, you're more likely to be placed in the support group rather than work-related activity group. So, to take a snapshot of November 2015, we had about just over 400,000 who were in the assessment phase who hadn't yet undergone the work capability assessment. Another 450,000 or so in the work-related activity group, nearly 1.5 million in the support group. And looking at the population as a whole as a mixture, some will be getting income-based ESA, more likely to be getting that contributions-based, and around 335,000 will get both. There is another group who are actually only entitled to ESA, who are not actually entitled to benefit, but get national insurance credits only, and those will be people who, because of other income or capital or working partner, are entitled to ESA, but are signing or not signing on, but are claiming ESA simply to get national insurance credits to protect their pension. The time limiting the contributory element has a big impact on the work-related activity group. Only 3% now of the RAG claimants get any contribution-based GSA. And I want to take anything more than anything else, it's the last bullet point here, is that half of all claimants in the work-related activity group are people with mental or behavioural disorders. It's quite a substantial chunk of people that reflects the ESA population as a whole, dwarfing any other kind of medical condition people get. Well, musculoskeletal disease is another 70 and various other things, but half of those, well over 100,000 people who relate to the kind of people affected by changes, which is what we talk about, are people with mental health conditions. So that's the kind of introduction and overview. I'm now going to hand over to Chris who's going to talk about the changes coming in next year.
Okay, so I'm going to take you through the changes to ESA that are going to be introduced next year and what this basically means for claimants. So you've seen a modified version of this graph earlier. So Steve mentions following a work capability assessment, a claimant's found either fit for work or is placed into one of the two ESA groups, the work-related activity group or the support group. So this is the amount of benefit you can get each week depending on the outcome of the work capability assessment. So from April 2017, new claimants of ESA who are placed in the work-related activity group will lose that work-related activity component. So effectively that aligns the rate of payment for people in the work-related activity group with those who are found fit for work and claim job seekers allowance, although the conditionality attached to that will probably stay different. So that's a 28% reduction in the weekly rate of payment to people in the work-related activity group compared to the current rates. So this affects all new claimants of ESA who are placed into the work-related activity group from April 2017. For reference, there are just over 450,000 people in that group at the moment. So those 450,000 people won't be impacted. There's going to be new claimants. So you could perhaps extrapolate up that over time, as the caseload rolls over, you might reach about that same level of people who lose that element of benefit. Those in the support group are unaffected, so their benefit stays as it is. There have been some transitional protections announced. We're expecting more to come in regulations that are yet to be laid before Parliament, but what we think we do know is that people who are still on legacy and capacity benefits, so it's a very small number, but some people haven't yet moved on to ESA. If when they do move on to ESA, if they're placed in the work-related activity group, they will retain the component. People who are in the support group that are reassessed for ESA and placed into the work-related activity group will retain the component. People who move out of the work-related activity group into work, but within 12 weeks of moving into work, for whatever reason, the job doesn't work out and you move back onto ESA, if they're in the work-related activity group, they'll retain the component. But if you're a new claimant of ESA from April 2017, or a new claimant in capacity benefits, you won't get that £29 a week. It's also worth bringing out universal credit. So universal credit will replace income-related ESA. So contributory ESA will retain as a separate benefit. But income-related ESA will be replaced by universal credit, and the government currently expects that to be fully rolled out by 2021. So there is an equivalent to the work-related activity group in universal credit. It's known as the limited capability for work element. That tracks the same rates of payment. And from April 2017, new claimants of universal credit who are placed in, who receive the limited capability for work element will also have that kind of component, £29.5. They won't be eligible for that. It does appear though that people who are on ESA and migrate across to universal credit, if they move into the component and they were receiving the work-related activity component, they will retain that additional bit of benefit. So that's what's happening. So why is this happening? The change was first announced by the Chancellor in the summer budget 2015 following the general election, and then formed part of the Welfare Reform and Work Act 2016. So in his budget speech, Mr Osborne referred to the perverse incentive whereby ESA claimants in the work-related activity group, the RAG, receive more money than claimants of job seekers allowance, but they get nothing like the help to find suitable employment. So he also said that while GSA caseload had fallen by 700,000 people since 2010, over the same period, numbers on incapacity benefits, such as ESA, had fallen by 90,000. And he used the stat that 61% of claimants in the work-related activity group wanted to work. So in effect, the reduction in benefit is taking place to incentivise people in this group to find work. But this idea that the work-related activity component, the additional benefit, is a disincentive and is meaning people aren't looking for work, has been quite hotly disputed. And we'll come to that shortly, but it's received quite a lot of criticism. In terms of savings, so it's essentially forecast to save £640 million a year, this cut for the activity group, by 2021. In the budget of 2016, this was revised to £450 million a year, but still a substantive amount. I think of all the changes that have been announced for ESA, this accounts for about 23% of the savings that they make from it. So how did we get to this point? So the changes, these proposals were opposed by opposition parties, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats, the SNP, but they got voted through the House of Commons. And it gets quite interesting when it gets to the House of Lords, and you might remember this, it received a fair amount of press coverage at the time. So prior to it reaching the House of Lords, some of the members of the House of Lords, alongside disability charities, launched an inquiry, the Halving the Gap inquiry, to look at the impact of these changes. And it concluded that the government should not proceed with the changes, as they would in fact make it more difficult for people in the work-related activity group to find employment and not incentivise them to find employment. As such, when the bill reached the House of Lords, Lord Lower Dalston, who was a crossbench chair, tabled an amendment to remove these clauses, and that was on 27th of January of this year. And this was agreed by 283 to 198. So the House of Lords voted for these clauses, these changes, not to go ahead. And then went back to the House of Commons, and the House of Commons overturned that decision, so rejected that. In addition to that, the Speaker recommended that these changes invoke financial privilege, so they shouldn't really be challenged by the Lords. However, Lord Lowe then tabled a further amendment, which was requiring an analysis of the impact of the cuts before they were introduced, so to understand what the impact would be more thoroughly. This was again rejected by the House of Commons, although it's probably notable at this point a few Conservative MPs rebelled against the government. I think most notably Heidi Allen, the MP for South Cambridgeshire, did a speech in Parliament opposing the cuts or the reductions, changes. On the 7th of March, the House of Lords backed down, and the bill then became an act and received royal assent on the 16th of March 2016. So the impact of the changes. I guess most of this has been covered already, but DWP produced an impact assessment for each piece of legislation that comes through, and they predicted that 500,000 families will be affected by this cut. And to get to that figure, they used the current stock of RAG claimants as a proxy for the affected population. The quality of this assessment has been criticised quite a lot. The Equality and Human Rights Commission, which is an independent body, critiqued the impact assessment report as quite limited. And you could argue the second amendment tabled by Lord Lowe, asking for a better impact assessment, probably reflects the quality of the first. It's probably worth remembering that of the group who claim the work-related activity component, only 14,000 of the group claim if you contribute to ESA. So most of these people are receiving income-related ESA. So they've got their low-income families, and so a 28% reduction in the amount of benefit they're receiving is relatively significant. And also, as Steve mentions, this is predominantly people who've got mental health issues. The quote underneath was in the impact assessment, and it perhaps reinforces again the key source of debate in this area. It's the view from the government that the reduction in money that people in the work-related activity group will receive is offset by the increased likelihood of them moving into work and the support that they can provide to do this. But of course, the counter by critics is that actually this is going to make it less likely for these people to find work, and thus more likely to enter into poverty. So the reaction to the changes. I did search quite a lot on the internet, and I have struggled to find really positive reviews of the changes, but I did have quite a lot of a look. I guess you could say that until the government announces the support that it's going to provide to people to mitigate the impact of these changes, we're not going to be entirely sure of the impact. However, there's a quote from the Halving Gap review there. Disability Rights UK was a bit of a quote, and I think the Daily Mirror at the time were quite vocal in their opposition to these changes. And central to the critique is this idea that reducing the level of benefit will incentivise people to find work. These groups of people and the evidence that they've kind of accumulated suggests that that won't be the case, and make it more difficult for people to get into employment. However, DWP and the government have announced a fair amount of support already for people who are likely to be affected by the cuts. A lot of this was announced by Lord Freud, who was the Minister for Welfare Reform during the House of Lords, if you want to check out on side. So we've got £60 million per year, rising to £100 million for practical employment support. And this includes £15 million in 2017-18 for the Local Job Centre Flexible Support Fund. So that's providing support for people trying to move into or start work with travel costs or clothes for uniforms, etc. And that's specifically for people who would be in the limited capability to work group. Guidance and training for job centres to ensure that it's targeted at the right groups of people, providing courses on gaining skills and access to mental health support. They've announced training for job centre staff to ensure that they're aware that they may need to talk to claimants about requesting a reassessment. They're also going to remove the 52-week limit for permitted work. So at the moment, someone in the work-related activity group can work up to 16 hours a week or receive up to £107.50 a week for 52 weeks. After that, they've got to be earning less or they'll lose their ESA. So that's going to become unlimited. So the 52-week limit will be removed. They're also going to invest £43 million in the next 3 years in trialling ways to provide specialist support for people with common mental health conditions, especially these are the people who are most impacted by these changes. And a task force has been set up to advise on further support. Also relevant, but not mentioned specifically here, is a work and health programme. My understanding is that the invitation to tender will be issued in October of this year. It was originally meant to be launching in April 2017, but I think that's just been pushed back to October of that year. So they're extending the contracts of the current programmes to counter that. And then we've got this green paper, which really should be providing the detail of the support that they're going to be providing to people in this group. This was initially scheduled to be a white paper. So a white paper is proposals of future policy. A green paper is perhaps more tentative and trying to inform future policy. Initially, we were expecting a white paper before the summer recess, so we're hoping that would it be released by now and we could dissect it in this session here. But of course, in March, Ian Duncan Smith, who was the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, resigned. He was replaced by Stephen Crabb. Mr. Crabb changed the white paper into a green paper. We currently believe that we should be receiving that green paper in October this year, but of course things do change relatively rapidly at the moment. But it does mean that the timings will be quite tight. So we'll get a green paper in October, and the changes to ESA will then come into force from April, so it's relatively tight. Worth keeping an eye out for that regardless. So in terms of further information on what next, there is a House of Commons Library briefing paper on the changes that are announced so far, and that will be updated as it comes through. There's also a paper on the introduction to ESA, and a paper that Steve's written on the changes to personal independence payment that might be linked to kind of future disability policy. And we're awaiting the green paper, and we're also relating regulations which should set out further detail, including particularly transitional protections for people. That's about a wrap. Our details are on there if you want to contact us in any way. Alternatively, if you've got any questions now, happy to field those. Thanks.
So one question, just to clarify on the slide on the impact of the transfer.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if this is a very big question, but saying these affected number of people is across what time period? And also these people who are not currently training at the moment, but will be in the future, is that right?
Yeah, so they've £28 is the roughly it's £29.5, but you have £28 of the cost. They've used kind of the number of people in that group at the moment as a proxy for the group of people who will eventually be affected. I think the years 2020-21, they're looking at for about when that will reach that level. Yeah.
For people that are coming to universal credit now, will they still be impacted by the changes in April, or will they be impacted by it now in the sense that they won't claim the ESA at all?
So you're talking about people who are on ESA at the moment.
People that transfer onto universal credit now, will it change for them again in April, or will they remain the same?
Well, if they're already getting the work-related activity, or if they will retain it, as long as their claim remains unbroken up until the point at which they transfer it first to universal credit. But there's whole lots of this, you mentioned there's the regulations which we're expecting on will give the details of these kind of transitional protection rules. I mean, all we have at the moment is a few fairly vaguely worded undertakings given by the government during the passage of the bill. The detail will be set out in the regulations. So we'll know more about how people in particular sets of circumstances are going to be affected by this.
Right. I'm interested in the detail that the number of people in a support group is now slightly higher than the number of people in the work-related activity group, because obviously that wasn't the intention when benefits were introduced. And I'm wondering if you can tell us what you think accounts for that difference. I am guessing it's greater use of regulation 35, but I'd like your opinion on it.
Yeah, on exceptional circumstances.
Exceptional
I've
circumstances.
not looked into this in depth, so I'm really aware that there's obviously been a creeping up of the proportion there. Obviously, there have been changes to the work capability assessment criteria and the way that the test itself is applied as a result of government reviews and the Harrington and Richfield reviews. Those will have had an impact on outcomes of the work capability assessment. It may be, as you say, that more people are becoming entitled to ESA by virtue or being placed in the support group because of the rules on exceptional circumstances. Just to explain, by the way, that there is provision in the ESA legislation that where a person doesn't meet the actual criteria set out in the regulations for, say, ESA or for the support component, they can be nevertheless awarded it in exceptional circumstances, and the wording is that if there would be, I can't remember exactly, a substantial risk to their health or well-being.
Risk to the health of own or another person's health if you were not to be found to have those capability work-related activity.
Which is obviously a circumstance whereby it allows DWD to think, right, this person is clearly not going to be able to work, even though they don't fit into the boxes, therefore we're going to award them ESA.
I'm just also wondering as well, is it because of appeals that would be more successful? Or more people really an appeal and then they get put back into the support group?
Yes. There's obviously there's two issues here. One issue, interesting one, is that for somebody claiming ESA now, quite often the important thing for people at the moment is getting awarded ESA in the first place. So even if it's a work-related activity, as long as you get awarded that. From now, the stakes will be higher to be placed in the support group, and that the people who are going to be appealing against challenging more decisions that they should be placed in the work-related activity. If they think you should be in the support group, they get a higher level of benefit. They're not subject to anything. The stakes are higher there, so that's going to sort of switch the whole focus of that activity. In terms of the outcomes in the moment in the work capability assessment and the success rates for appeals, it's slightly, yes, and the success rates for appeals are high, but it's complicated with the fact that since 2013, anybody wishing to challenge a benefits decision must first ask the DWP for mandatory reconsideration. And the success rates at the mandatory reconsideration stage are much lower than for people who actually go on to appeal. We don't know quite what the effect of mandatory reconsideration has been on appeal. We obviously know appeal volumes have gone through the floor, but also those people who are going on to appeal stand much higher chance of success, whether that's because of the sort of filter effect of mandatory reconsideration. There's lots of research that needs to be going on then. I don't even know whether there is any detailed research, but it's a moot point.
Can I ask a follow-up question? With regard to the work capability assessment and appeals, I mean, we know a lot about ATOS and the controversies surrounding their assessment process. Maximus, I mean, what is their line of contract now, and
Well, not if you read the National Audit Office report put out in January this year about contracted out health and disability assessments. There are still issues which need to be ironed out there, and the Public Accounts Committee followed that up as well, concentrating not only on the quality but also the cost of assessments. The average cost of an assessment has increased without, at that time, any of the information they had, without any corresponding increase in the quality and accuracy the report received. I think the implications of what a member of the report is that they think that the contractual oversight of DWP needs to improve, but the terms of the Maximus contract are give the DWP more levers than was the case over the previous contract with Atos. But I think in terms of how well is Maximus doing, it's probably too early to say.
This is more an observation rather than a question, actually. I previously worked in ESA for the department in the new claims processing and also in the WCA team. I've just come back to the sort of rise in the support group. What we found within the department, and I don't know if this is officially anywhere, but we found certainly that with the backlog that Atos had at the time, they weren't able to carry out the WCAs when they should have been. What they were doing was putting people through scrutiny, which meant they weren't actually seeing them for assessment, they were just automatically placing them in the support group. So that's maybe another sort of tilde of things as well. And also just with regards to the mental health issue within ESA, anyone with a drug addiction or alcoholism is also classed as a mental illness under ESA as well. So chances are that could be also why those figures are fairly high, given how the world is today with those difficulties.
Yeah.
Lots of people say that the people in the support group are affected by the changes. Are you sure?
Well, we can't tell
Here's my ask.
what future way legislation will go, what other changes will be made. All we have is an undertaking said by the government. I mean, this is the legislation only affects people in the work-related activity group and not the support group. So unless and until there's any change in policy or decides otherwise, we have to assume that that's going to be the case.
Can I ask as well about the criteria, the 16 definitions, conditions? Are they planned to be changed or shifted at all? Finding who should support
well,
because
yeah.
I found the clients, many of them, the assessors don't agree.
Well, there were 5 annual independent reviews of the work capability assessment by Malcolm Harrington and then Paul, a whole series of recommendations, most of which I think have been taken forward, although it's some will not be. Ian Duncan Smith gave a speech, I think it was last August, where he hinted at the Department for Pensions were considering further changes to ESA and to the assessment. It was all very vaguely worded, but it was along the same lines as Labour said back in 2008 when ESA was introduced about focusing on what people can do rather than what they can't do. So we have no idea really what was actually being seriously considered at that point. I don't know whether Stephen Craven and DWP now will come out with further proposals for yet another series of reforms to ESA. I rather suspect with all the furore that's happened over the abandonment of the PIP changes following the budget and the same which has had other implications of wider policy and a more thoroughgoing review of how the government treats disabled people and where are we going with disability benefits, is that they would be very reluctant to go yet further change without being very sure exactly where we're going with it, what the outcome will be. The wild card, of course, is Brexit and what that means for the public finances. And this is, we simply don't know what the implications of that would be in the long run, or even in the immediate short run. But the undertaking that Stephen Crabb gave following the budget was that we no more changes to PIP, no more other changes to disability benefits, I think we think covering ESA as well, beyond those already legislated for. In other words, the changes, ESA changes in the Welfare Reform and Work Act. That was undertaken then, whether it still applies now, we don't know.
Do you know any more about what actually happens with the mandatory reconsideration process? It's kind of something I asked for and I trust it happens, but do you know idea?
It's a black box thing. It is purely inside. It's an internal DWP procedure. So we really don't know what happens about that. And I say I don't even know if there's any research or field work being conducted about what happens mandatory reconsideration, what the outcomes are, what the process is. I mean, I think within DWP, I might be wrong, that it is when you ask for mandatory reconsideration, it's a separate decision maker who undertakes that. So there wouldn't be the decision, it wouldn't be reviewed by the decision maker who's responsible for the original decision. It would be somebody else taking a fresh advice. The extent whether that is a genuine, in-depth process where all the evidence is reviewed, or the extent to which it's rubber stamping the original one, we don't know. They say the outcomes, the success rates from mandatory reconsiderations are far lower than those who actually go on to appeal.
I remember a little while ago, it was found that the work capability assessment discriminated against people with mental health problems, and then there was supposed to be a process of reviewing it and maybe changing it, and I kind of lost the thread of that. So I wonder if you can remind me of what happened, where are we at with that one?
Yes, it was the public law project were successful there, and then there were subsequent developments. I can't remember myself, but it wasn't quite as clear cut the outcome was. I think there was some requirement on the government to reconsider the work capability assessment process and how it affects people with mental health conditions rather than review of it. There is a fact sheet which I probably drew to attention a few weeks ago at the PLP website, which sets out what happened and what the whole outcome was of it. So if you want to email me afterwards, I'll send you a link. But it was more complicated than what eventually happened.
Thank you, I'll do that.
Any further questions, please?
Okay, well, thank you very